Right back to the big book, unless somebody wants to put something in the little chat box there. So, of course, as usual, the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous. Reflecting here on right at the start of chapter 4, which is a chapter, if you're not familiar with the program, is a chapter called We Agnostics, which looks at the idea of faith, really, and from the agnostic point of view. The program, at least in my experience, isn't try to convert anybody to anything. But obviously, spirituality and faith is a huge aspect of the 12-step program and addiction recovery in general. So it's a pretty enlightening chapter. But there's part of this chapter which highlights something really important, I feel, which I've never really heard about, talked about in meetings. Not surprisingly, because it comes more from like Buddhist and Hindu thought, I feel. But it's something that's, I feel, really quite important and has really stood out in my experience. So right at the start of We Agnostics on the first page, it says, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So, if a mere code of morals or a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. I know this from direct experience of this life. I tried for a long time, about 4.5 years, to get morals and a better philosophy of life to make me see better, let's say, or non-judgmentally or compassionately. So when I first started recovery, I got into Buddhism really quick, mostly Zen and Chan. And then when I started studying yoga, yoga was presented to me, not at the fault of any teacher, it's just the way they taught. But the way they taught was essentially that I was going to use yoga in order to make Jay compassionate and make Jay see non-judgmentally. And then after a few years of that, when the old programming of Jay kicked in and started to judge, it got punished for that, essentially. Or I had teachers tell me that I was wrong and I was failing, essentially. Which for an alcoholic mind of my sort is just another thing I failed at. Yeah? So highlights something very important. If a mere code of morals and a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. So if that system of using yoga thought to make myself compassionate and see not others, were going to work, it would have worked because I was totally invested in that, yeah? And then some stuff happened because life unfolds, and then my head becomes super judgmental again. I was missing something in this process. Yeah? A mere code of morals and a better philosophy of life were not working because Jay is infected with something called alcoholism. And Jay is a conditioned thing, meaning there's a sense that I'm doing Jay. There's a sense that Chris is doing Chris and Sue is doing all the suing there. But there is no doer, as they would say in India or in Indian thought and in a lot of Buddhist thought, Eastern thought in general. There's no doer of Jay. So that begs a question, what is all of this doing happening, including like the mental system, the emotions, the ideas, yeah? How is that formulated if there's no thing in the center of this body doing that? It's formulated by the past. So essentially J is a culmination of things that it's come that it's come through in the past as a body. Yeah, that is how J sees now, and J has another little thing that grows in that thing we call self. So that as the body moves through life, the brain moves through life, it collects information essentially, and all of that past information is now used to see. Yeah, as a thought system, a belief system, ideas, and all of these things that, let's say, come together to make a J. Well, in recovery, J is called self, and relying on self has failed. But if there's no doer of J, then really J is just a culmination of past. Yeah? And that's how it sees, and it's conditioned. Now there's a sense that I'm doing that. There's a sense that I'm doing self. So when the brain thinks, it presents those thoughts as my thoughts. That me is seen as a separate individual thing. And in that case, I'm listening to those thoughts, and there's a sense that I'm doing all of these ideas and thoughts. Yeah? That's not the case. But that's the sense that comes with the body and the mind, and from awareness identifying with that body and mind. So, from our idea that I'm doing that, there's a sense that I'm going to change the way I think and see the world, essentially. Yeah? That's exactly what failed, because I wasn't seeing that I'm not the doer of that. That my view of the world is culminated through past. So really I'm only seeing the past happening right now, let's say. Yeah. But the sense is that I'm seeing the world now, and I have a bunch of beliefs about that. But those beliefs really are having me, because they're based on the past, and I'm listening to those beliefs. So when I tried to change those beliefs so that the brain would become non-dualistic, non-judgmental, completely compassionate, when that failed, it was a huge blow to me, because I was under the understanding that I was doing these thoughts and beliefs. But that's not the case. They are conditioned. So when I try to change them and it fails, it only makes sense because they're conditioned, yeah? So alcoholic J sees one way, and it's not with a ton of compassion, and it's definitely not through the lens of oneness. So a mere code of morals and a better philosophy of life were not sufficient. Yes, it was not sufficient because those morals are not going to change the conditioning of the core beliefs. And then those core beliefs had picked up one other condition called alcoholism, which is super self-centeredness. Yeah? That super self-centeredness puts even more focus on self because it's self-centered. And now I'm really tied to those beliefs. And those beliefs are whatever. The world is scary, I'm worthless, everything is my fault. And because of that, it's always going to be this way. This is the story of the conditioned mental system. I'm not doing that. That's coming from past. It was formulated somehow through past. Yeah? And then if I listen to it, I see that way. So mere morals and a better philosophy of life are not going to override that conditioning because it's super self-centered, yeah? Self does not it can't be retuned by mere morals and philosophies. At least in my experience. So an alcoholic of my type, it doesn't get retuned to see perfectly. It always sees from its conditioned view, yeah? Because I'm not doing that view. So if my head sees, let's use an example. If my head sees this watch strap as green, it's always going to see it as green. It doesn't matter how many books I read that it's blue. As soon as the eyes hit it, it's green. Yeah? So in some ways, my head still sees this way. My head has me in the position of worthless. It just has it that way. So that's what it presents, because that's what it learned from the past. Now I've tried to change that through morals and philosophies, and it just went right back to its old tricks. Yeah? I feel that's very important to see. Otherwise, this program becomes used as a self-help program. And it's used as if Jay is going to start seeing perfectly and differently. And that's exactly what failed. And I almost relapsed when those teachers started to tell me that I was failing. Yeah? Because it was just another failure to tell me that I'm worthless yet again. Yeah? So, okay. So if a mere code of morals and a better philosophy of life were sufficient to overcome alcoholism, many of us would have recovered long ago. The other part about that is it points to that this is not a self-help program. In many ways, self cannot be helped. Yeah? You quit self through this program. You lose faith in it, and in doing so, the life of this body and Jay gets a lot better when Jay's not running the show. Because Jay's head still sees from its past conditioning. Yeah? So you just replace Jay with your name, and then there you go. The head still sees through that old conditioning. It's beautiful. But if you try to take this program and use it to work with Jay morally, that fails in my experience. Yeah. All right. But we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. Why is that? Because the conditioning of the mental system is going to override any code or external thing that that comes in. So this is like the water filter idea. Everything that comes in through the senses here is filtered through self. So it's filtered through, let's say, the mental understanding. Meaning everything that takes place is now painted the color of past conditioning or beliefs of Jay, yeah? So now it's no longer what's coming in through the senses. It's now Jay's belief or Jay's view of what has come in through the senses. So no matter how much we try, we can't get around that with new morals and philosophies. It's like if I see the book, the head says book, yeah? And then I read another book that said, oh, don't see that way. See every book as a lamp. But I can't override the system that says book because it's conditioned. It's like automatic, yeah? Paul Hederman beautifully says it's mechanical. So the head sees book. And it doesn't matter, just like it says here, no codes and philosophies were going to save us. It didn't matter how many books I read that said, see the book as a lamp. I still saw it as a book. Yeah. This is the conditioning in many ways. It's beautiful. You can see it in your own life, I'm sure. Doesn't matter what's happening around you, the head has you in a position. So it didn't matter what went on in my life, my brain would still hold me in the position of worthless. Or less than, let's say. Yeah? It didn't matter. And any evidence outside was completely overridden by the belief of the mental system. So that's kind of like the water filter of the head. Everything comes in through the senses, the mental system paints it in its own belief system. Yeah? If you live listening as that belief system, you live under its control, essentially. And then there's a sense from that position that you're going to change that belief system. But this is saying very clearly that's not going to work. Yeah? New morals and philosophies are not going to change the belief system because the belief system is conditioned by the past. This is really good news to me because it's tons of effort and it was like a crazy amount of work and stuff trying to change the belief system, trying to change the ideas, yeah? And it wasn't working. So the only answer from that point of view is you have to try harder. You have to read more, you got to do more of this and this, you got to go to more talks, you got to meditate more, whatever, yeah? It was working to the point where I wasn't drinking, but the discomfort was not removed, that's for sure. So the point is, self sees from the viewpoint of its conditioned past, and that's how it sees. This book and program to me is not about changing how the eyes see and how the brain thinks. It's a loss of faith in it. And one of the best ways I feel to lose faith is see that it's not going to change that much, and it doesn't matter how much you try. And this text right here is confirming that, yeah? So it said, but we found that such codes and philosophies did not save us, no matter how much we tried. And I tried a lot. I tried a lot to have my brain see differently. And then after years of attempts, it just went right back to its old tricks of, no, you're still worthless. And in that case, you become very judgmental of everybody else, because the brain is trying to fight that idea of worthlessness, usually by then selling another product that everybody else sucks and you're better than everybody. But it kind of feels like you know that's not true, and on goes the process. Okay. It's not easy to change those formed beliefs. That's right. It's not easy. Well, you could say it's impossible for core beliefs. Even in psychology, they say there's huge schools of psychology that say it's impossible to change core beliefs because they're conditioned. You're not doing the beliefs. The beliefs were learned by the mental system, and now it's just firing the same belief. There's no doer of that belief. Yeah? You're not doing the thoughts in your head. They're done automatically, and then your head goes, those are mine. And there's an identification with that my thought, which sticks you to being the sense of being the doer of the other thoughts. But that's not the case. Yeah? So it's impossible to change really root beliefs. You can lose faith in them, though. And this is the program, in my experience. The 12-step program is a loss of faith because you are not self. That's not what you are. That is a finite system which is learned and then sees from what it learned, and it will unlearn when the body dies. Yeah, you are not of that. You are of the infinite. Very strong inner critic. Yes, I'm an alcoholic. So, alcoholic, super self-centered. So when the head critiques itself, yeah, you get stuck in it. And that can go on for many years. All right. So then it says, we could wish to be moral. We could wish to be philosophically comforted. In fact, we could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. So we could not overcome the conditioning of self. We could not change it because we're not doing it in the first place. This is very important to see, I feel. If there's a sense that you're doing all of the mental movement, all of the beliefs in your head, and there is a sense of that, there is a sense of individuality happening. If you're buying into that sense, then you are being driven by self. You are being driven by past beliefs being presented right now as they see the world. Including in spiritual practice, you are being driven by those ideas. Spiritual practice, in my experience, was one of the things that highlighted this whole thing, which is why this little paragraph is so important. I thought spiritual practice and spiritual ideas were better than the ideas in my head. And in one way they are, because they direct this life. When the head says do this, you can reference some sort of eightfold path from Buddhism or the 8 limbs of yoga or whatever, the yamas and the niyamas, in order to redirect your thinking, yeah? But the point is, when your head says do this, and then you go to like the eightfold path and say, okay, I'm not going to do what the mental system says, I'm going to do what Buddhism says, that is a momentary relief, but the mental system is still going to present that first one. And this is the point. You can only rely on the eightfold path or some moral compass for so long, but the mental system's conditioning still sees the same way, and it will get you eventually. Yeah. If you have faith in the mental system, that conditioning is going to get you eventually. To me, relief in recovery is not about just holding on to something for dear life. It is at the start, for sure, in order to redirect the friggin' moral system, which is way off the market in my case. I had to hold on to something, but gripping on to a moral compass in order to just not go with the head doesn't change the head. The head is gonna keep going. Yeah, so it's really, we use the moral system to stay away from the craziness of the mental system at the start. But it's a movement of losing faith in that mental system, so that when it presents ideas, you really start to lose faith. But the ideas it presents are still going to be the same. Yeah, that's why it's saying any moral or better philosophy were not sufficient to overcome alcoholism, because the alcoholism continues on. Yeah, you can stay away from those, let's say, alcoholic thoughts, quote unquote, for a while, but they continue on. So really it's only a tactic at the start, but you've got to lose faith in that movement, that mental movement. We could wish to be moral, we could wish to be philosophically comforted. We could will these things with all our might, but the needed power wasn't there. Our human resources, as marshaled by the will, were not sufficient. They failed utterly. That's exactly what happened to me. They failed utterly. As marshaled by the will were not sufficient, our human resources, because the head is conditioned. So it doesn't matter how much I try to overcome that mental system. It's going to keep going. Yeah, I thought it was going to start seeing differently, but I wasn't seeing that I'm not the doer of that mental system and that it's conditioned. So in that case, when it failed to see compassionately, I thought I was failing. But it's self that's failing. So yeah, we have to keep the focus on that self is conditioned. What you are is before all of that. Woo! That's great news, yeah? Our human resources were not sufficient. They failed utterly. So Jay's efforts to change Jay failed utterly. And that's great news, because this book would say Jay is self, and all you do is lose faith in that, and then this life goes better. So in a way, the failure of Jay was really good, because I didn't die, I didn't kill myself from drinking or whatever. But it highlighted something, that I was trying to change something that I'm not doing in the first place, and that thing's called me. Yeah. All right. Let's see if there's any questions. Awareness is the viewer. Self is ego, and we are in reality awareness. The root of the thing to me is what's seeing what's called ego. Yeah? Like from Ramana Maharshi, this is like the me thought or the I thought. And then it's important to see that that self will claim everything. So self will claim to be the seer of the thoughts. And in that case, you're bound to the thoughts. If there's a sense of being the one who sees the thoughts, that is a thought. The one who sees thoughts, the one who's watching self, yeah, that sense is the self, is the sense of individuality. That is a thought. So you're still in a duality there. The mental system will claim the seeing by the thought, I am seeing the thoughts. Yeah? That is a thought. Yeah. Yeah. We're the ones standing in our own way most of the time. Well, self is standing in the way, let's say. It is through the identification with self as being what you are that ties you in. That ties you into self, and then self is driving. It's important to see, I feel, as not you, or like in a Advaita or whatever, they would say not this, you know. So or like when we do the who's listening things, whatever can be heard in this experience, or whatever's changing in the experience of Jay, that is of self. That is of self. So when that's identified with as what you are, then there's a sense that I'm standing in my own way. But really, it's self which is standing in the way. And you can see it by its repetitiveness. Yeah? It's like self always puts you in the same position if you're living as it. It always puts you in the same circumstances, in the same seat. Yeah? It's in seeing. It's great. This is one of the reasons that when you try to change the mental system, it doesn't go as you had fantasized. And then the answer is always, okay, I just have to do more and more and more stuff. Yeah? Because you're not the doer of that mental system. And one of the parts of it, one of the ways you can identify it, let's say, is by how repetitive it is. So I keep ending up in the same positions. I keep relapsing, let's say. Yeah? Because you're listening to something which is super repetitive because it's conditioned. Because the mental system is conditioned, then, it does the same move every time. Like if you watch the thoughts, they're the same thoughts you've had probably since you were like 8 years old. They just keep putting you in the same seat over and over and over again. Yeah? So if you listen to that, then yes, there's a sense that I am in my own way. But it's not you doing that. There's a listening to a mental system which is conditioned and super repetitive, and it's got you feeling like I'm in my own way. So if you see that mental system as not what you are, it no longer puts you in the same positions. It will sell you the same product of go that way, yeah? But if you don't identify with it, you don't go with it. And then you will see that what is standing in your way is what we would call in recovery self. You're not doing that. It's by obeying self. It's like there's a guy in some of the meetings I go to, and he would say, my whole alcoholism is my brain would talk and I would obey it. That is the whole thing, yeah? So there was an obeyance. We obey the mental system because it's identified as our mental system. So when there's a bunch of thoughts going on in the head, one of those thoughts is me, yeah? Now the thing Sue mentioned is what comes up. I am seeing the thoughts. But that I who senses that they're seeing the thoughts is one of the thoughts. That is self, yeah? That is actually the bondage of self. Being identified as the seer of the thoughts, that is the bondage of self, because that's what bonds us. You are before the sense of being the one who sees the thought. Yeah. But those thoughts and ideas are super repetitive because they're conditioned. You're not doing them. If you were doing the mental system, you would have changed it a long time ago, like it says in that paragraph. Yeah, we would have been fine way long ago if we could change the mental system, but we cannot. Yeah, this is why it says philosophy and moral codes don't work, because it's conditioned, and you can see it with how repetitive it is. So the thing about standing in your own way is like you can see how often the head puts you in the same place. If that's the case, it's probably that we're living as self. So something is standing in our way, and it's what we identify as. Not you're doing something wrong. There's no reason you wouldn't identify as it. But it is the identification with the mental system. Then there's the sense I'm in my way. Yeah. But it's really the identification. Self is in your way if you abide by it. Yeah? If you live as that mental system. If you don't, then there's nothing in the way because you're just sitting in the infinite, let's say. Ah. So it's a loss of faith in this thing they call self. Self to me being both the thoughts and the sense of being the one who sees the thoughts. That is two faces of one thing that we call small s self in recovery. Ah. Beautiful. And if you kind of crossed what I ended up crossing, which was I tried to change self and it didn't abide, yeah? And in that failure, there was something shown, and then whatever, non-duality and Advaita highlighted that a lot. So you keep the spotlight on self. Something is failing me. It's called me, yeah? But it's not actually what I am. And that's very good news, because it means you can stop abiding by it, like today. Great. Is there any other questions or anything anybody wants to put in the little chat box there? Feel free.